As the world turns ever more digital, it would be natural to think the tech industry has rendered the physical record shop extinct. Why would you need any sort of physical records when you can access literally any record ever created on your device of choice for just a few pounds a month? It's way easier to do and you don't even need to think about storing or damaging the record. Silicon Valley promised a future built entirely on digital media and streaming algorithms, and for the most part, they delivered. The resulting shift in our behavior systematically dismantled some of the most well-funded corporate empires on Earth, banishing massive entertainment retailers to the same historical dustbin as video rental businesses and catalog showrooms. Surviving a technological disruption of that magnitude is practically unheard of, especially for a legacy brick-and-mortar business carrying massive real estate overheads. Yet, one century-old brand stood its ground, defied every conventional retail metric, and successfully navigated the exact extinction event that killed its direct rivals. That brand is HMV. HMV is a retailer that navigated two separate financial collapses, entered administration multiple times, and watched its international empire completely evaporate. As people watched their impending demise, the business engineered a massive structural pivot instead. They completely abandoned their bloated corporate strategies and fundamentally rewired how they stocked their shelves, choosing to bet their entire survival on a demographic that the tech industry had completely written off. The story of this century-old retailer shows exactly how a failing giant ripped up its own rulebook to engineer a highly unlikely retail comeback. Let's go way back to 1898, with a simple painting by a British artist named Francis Barraud. He painted a portrait of his late brother's terrier, a dog named Nipper, who was depicted intentionally listening to a cylinder phonograph. The gramophone company, acting as one of the earliest pioneers of the recording industry, recognized the massive marketing potential of this striking image, and they purchased the painting alongside its trademark rights in 1899, utilizing the imagery to sell their sound equipment. A decade later, in 1909, they officially used that painting to create the His Master's Voice record label. This iconic branding provided the literal foundation for the inaugural dedicated His Master's Voice shop. On July 20th, 1921, the company transformed a former men's clothing shop located at 363 Oxford Street in London into a dedicated music destination. They even brought in Sir Edward Elgar to participate in the opening ceremonies. Elgar was arguably the most famous English composer of the era, best known as the man behind the legendary Pomp and Circumstance marches. His presence immediately validated the shop as a serious cultural institution rather than just another high street novelty. The concept proved immediately resilient. In March 1931, the gramophone company merged with the Columbia Graphophone Company to form Electric and Musical Industries, a massive corporate entity better known as the legendary record label EMI. Under EMI's massive umbrella, the retail side of the business continued to operate even when the original Oxford Street shop was severely damaged by a fire in 1937. EMI completely rebuilt the interior and reopened the shop 2 years later on May 8, 1939. This time, they brought in Sir Thomas Beecham, a globally renowned orchestral conductor and a major celebrity within classical music, to officially open the doors. By the 1960s, HMV began aggressively expanding its retail operations across London, transitioning from a single famous location into a recognizable metropolitan chain. Throughout the 1970s, the company doubled in size to become the country's leading specialist music retailer, and they established a network of newer, much larger shops that offered an unparalleled physical selection of records. This massive scale allowed them to successfully fight off aggressive emerging competitors like Our Price, which had established itself in 1972, and Richard Branson's upstart Virgin Megastores, which arrived on the scene in 1976. This expansion strategy reached a historic peak in 1986 when the company opened a massive new flagship location right down the road at 150 to 154 Oxford Street. The event was attended by music icons Bob Geldof, fresh off the global success of organizing Live Aid, alongside Michael Hutchence, the charismatic frontman of the rock band INXS. With these rock stars bringing massive media attention, HMV proudly announced the new location as the largest record shop in the world at the time. The momentum carried the company into a third decade of continuous growth, pushing their total physical footprint to over 320 shops globally by the 1990s. This era included major international plays, such as their 1990 expansion into the United States, where they opened the largest music shop in North America, located at 86th and Lexington in New York City. The brand was so wildly successful under the EMI umbrella that a massive financial restructuring was put into motion. In February 1998, EMI entered a joint venture with the private equity firm Advent International to formally divest its retail operations. They formed a new entity called HMV Media Group under the leadership of retail executive Alan Giles, who then immediately acquired the HMV shops and then absorbed Dillons, a major British bookseller. Shortly after, the newly formed media group bought out the rival Waterstones book chain specifically to merge its own operations with Dillons. This bold consolidation created an absolute behemoth in the entertainment retail space, which eventually floated on the London Stock Exchange in 2002 as HMV Group plc. The brand entered the mid-2000s feeling absolutely invincible. But following an unexpectedly poor period of retail trading leading up to Christmas 2005, the private equity firm Permira sensed an opening in the market. In February 2006, Permira approached the board with a conditional takeover bid of £762 million, valuing the entertainment giant at roughly 190 pence a share. HMV flatly rejected the offer, publicly declaring it an insufficient valuation of their empire. Permira returned to the negotiating table a month later with a second, much higher offer of £845 million, but HMV declined it once again. In its official statement, the board said, "In light of these plans and the board's view of the medium and long-term prospects of the business, the board unanimously believes that the revised proposal from Permira continues to undervalue the group." This prompted the equity firm to withdraw from bidding entirely. The board genuinely believed their massive HighStreet footprint justified a much higher valuation, completely blinding them to the rapidly shifting technological landscape surrounding them. At the same time, HMV Group initiated an aggressive physical expansion campaign designed to absorb their fallen competitors. The internal corporate logic dictated that expanding the brick-and-mortar footprint would naturally scale revenue and crush the remaining competition. In 2006, the HMV Group took aim at the publishing sector by purchasing the Ottercars book chain, executing a plan to successfully merge those 130 shops directly into their existing Waterstones brand. The acquisitions continued relentlessly as the wider music industry began to fracture. When the popular offbeat retailer FOP went into administration in June 2007, it resulted in the immediate closure of 81 shops and left 800 staff members redundant. FOP had plunged into severe financial troubles shortly after buying out the rival chain Music Zone, creating an opportunity for HMV to step in and buy the brand name on July 31st. They managed to save 6 of the most profitable locations and preserve around 70 jobs, effectively scooping up the best assets of a fallen rival. A year later, on Christmas Eve 2008, HMV watched its massive competitor Zavvi enter administration. Zavvi was the direct successor to the legendary Virgin Megastores empire, having traded for less than a year under its new guise before facing financial ruin. HMV Group quickly moved in to capitalize on the collapse, and by mid-January 2009, HMV announced intentions to acquire 14 of the vacant Zavvi shops, eventually adding 5 more the following month, alongside another former Zavvi shop located in Exeter's Princess Hay development. By April 2009, HMV was the undisputed king of physical media on the high street. While impressive on paper, attempting to be everything to everybody required giant, expensive high street locations to house both mainstream top 40 displays and deep, slow-moving back catalogs. To cover the crippling rent, HMV desperately needed new revenue streams, and it began sprawling in every conceivable direction. In 2009, they dove headfirst into the live music market, executing a £46 million takeover of the Mama Group to control iconic venues like the Hammersmith Apollo. The executive board just kept throwing cash at experimental concepts to build a wider entertainment ecosystem. They partnered with Curzon Cinemas to build movie screens above their shops, launched a doomed social network called Get Closer, and bought a £7.7 million stake in the download service 7 Digital. Yet, despite all these scattered investments, the entire company remained anchored to the fatal assumption that HighStreet foot traffic and physical compact discs would be the retail standard forever. This extreme fragility was fully exposed by the global recession and the mainstream adoption of digital streaming, culminating on January 5th, 2011. Management announced that falling sales would result in profits hitting the extreme lower end of analyst forecasts, causing the share price to immediately plummet by 20%. To stop the bleeding, they announced the closure of 40 HMV shops and 20 Waterstones locations, specifically targeting towns saddled with multiple redundant branches. This retreat quickly escalated into a total abandonment of the book market in June 2011, when the company sold the entire Waterstones business to A&N Capital Fund Management for £53 million. The desperate fire sale continued into the following year as they liquidated the Hammersmith Apollo to AEG Live and Eventim for £32 million before offloading the remainder of the Mama Group to Lloyd's Development Capital for £7.3 million. These emergency asset liquidations ultimately failed to save the core business, and HMV Group entered administration on January 15, 2013. Deloitte was appointed as administrator and shares were suspended, instantly putting 4,350 UK employees at risk of redundancy. The ensuing administration process exposed roughly £20 million owed in unpaid taxes. Deloitte initiated widespread closures and major corporate layoffs, making Chief Executive Trevor Moore redundant alongside 190 head office and distribution center staff. The once dominant global empire was rapidly dismantled as 103 shops were slated for closure, while 6 locations were sold off to the supermarket chain Morrisons, and the entire Hong Kong and Singapore operations were handed over to AID Partners Capital Limited. The brand was temporarily rescued from total oblivion in April 2013 when the restructuring firm Hilco Capital stepped in to acquire HMV, saving 141 shops and around 2,500 jobs. Hilco had quietly bought HMV's debt from creditors like the Royal Bank of Scotland and Lloyds Banking Group, positioning themselves to take control in a deal estimated at £50 million. Upon taking the reins, Hilco immediately initiated a drastic turnaround plan designed to slash overhead and shift the inventory focus away from purely selling music. They aggressively reduced the headcount across the business to save £7.8 million on the wages budget, eliminating security staff, cashiers, and supervisors, while forcing store managers to step in and provide basic floor cover. To maximize revenue from this skeletal crew, the product mix was altered to push high-margin merchandise, technology accessories, and books. Finally recognizing that their historic real estate was actually a massive financial burden, the company closed the gargantuan 150 to 154 Oxford Street flagship in January 2014, as HMV retreated to the original, much smaller 363 Oxford Street location to quietly lick its wounds. The Hilco strategy actually managed to briefly stabilize the company. By 2014, HMV had clawed its way back to gain the second highest share of the UK entertainment market, directly behind Amazon. The leaner approach appeared to be working, as a filing to Companies House revealed the profit of £17 million generated in the 11 months since entering administration. This momentum continued into January 2015 when HMV successfully overtook Amazon to become the largest retailer of physical music in the United Kingdom. However, this success proved purely temporary because the relentless pressure of rising rent costs and the unstoppable dominance of digital streaming eventually overwhelmed the revised business model. The breaking point arrived on December 28, 2018, when Hilco Capital confirmed that HMV had once again been placed into administration, blaming a massive tsunami of retail competition that made the HighStreet model completely unsustainable. This time, the rescue of the historic brand came from across the Atlantic. Doug Putman, the CEO of Canadian record shop chain Sunrise Records, already understood exactly how to capitalize on a falling giant. He had originally purchased the struggling Sunrise chain in 2014 when it consisted of just 5 stores. When HMV Canada fell into receivership in 2017, Putman negotiated directly with landlords to take over 70 of those vacant locations, instantly transforming his small business into a national chain. Having already proven his unique ability to operate profitably in a dying retail sector, Putman crossed the Atlantic to execute the exact same playbook. On February 5th, 2019, Sunrise Records officially announced its acquisition of HMV Retail Ltd from Hilco UK for a reported value of just £883,000. Putman applied a completely different philosophy to physical retail. He understood that the massive decline in physical sales was primarily driven by non-traditional sellers like grocery chains abandoning the format entirely, which left a dedicated, highly motivated core demographic completely unserved. Putman rejected the prevailing narrative that physical music retail was dying, especially among specialist record stores. When asked how he operated in a market dominated by streaming, he responded, "You're never going to convince those people otherwise," signaling his belief that customer habits were already entrenched but not representative of the entire market. Sunrise leveraged this by heavily emphasizing the sale of vinyl phonographs, proving the format's viability after their Canadian operation sold at least 500,000 vinyl LPs in 2017 alone. To successfully export this model into the United Kingdom, Putman would first have to close 27 highly unprofitable locations to instantly relieve the company of its toxic rent liabilities. This wave of closures included the iconic flagship store at 363 Oxford Street. The remaining stores were restructured to prioritize the exact physical experience that online competitors inherently lacked. The new management team realized that the old top-down, centralized corporate strategy was worse than useless in a modern specialist market. For years, corporate buyers sitting in London offices had dictated exactly what a shop in Glasgow or Cardiff had to display on its front tables. Sunrise abolished this practice immediately. They actively encouraged local shop managers to curate their own record sections to target the highly specific musical tastes of their regional demographics. This total decentralization allowed each individual store to build a unique inventory. If a local demographic preferred heavy metal vinyl, or if a university town had a massive appetite for niche indie rock, the manager finally possessed the authority to stock exactly what their specific customers actually wanted to buy. This strategy ultimately transformed the shops into genuine destinations for music discovery. The momentum generated by this strategy was almost immediately derailed by COVID though. National lockdowns forced the total closure of all HMV shops across England for extended multi-month periods between March 2020 and April 2021. Despite suffering a total loss of physical foot traffic, the leaner business model survived the freeze. The company emerged from the lockdowns highly motivated to capitalize on a public desperate to leave their homes and return to the high street. HMV celebrated its 100th birthday in July 2021 by releasing 37 exclusive limited edition vinyl albums alongside a 100-track CD compilation entitled Now That's What I Call HMV. This event successfully drove a massive surge of traffic back into the physical locations and onto their website. Building on this post-pandemic energy, the company initiated a comprehensive rebranding strategy in October 2021. They adopted the motto, the HMV shop, for new shop fronts and social media channels, while retaining the classic dog and phonograph logo at flagship locations. The brand smoothly transitioned from simply surviving to actively expanding its physical footprint again. HMV began opening new stores and relocating existing ones, specifically targeting retail locations recently vacated by fallen apparel chains like the Arcadia Group. They opened new outlets in former Burton Menswear and Dorothy Perkins premises in Dunfermline and Bexleyheath. This allowed them to take advantage of highly favorable commercial real estate conditions, securing prime high street locations at a fraction of historic costs. In March 2021, they even secured a sponsorship deal with the Empire Music Venue in Coventry, renaming it the HMV Empire to firmly solidify their connection to live entertainment. The ultimate validation of this turnaround strategy arrived in April 2023, when HMV confirmed it had signed a lease to reopen a new format shop in their original historic home at 363 Oxford Street. The location had been closed for 4 years and temporarily occupied by American Candy Outlets. The grand reopening in November 2023 marked HMV's third historic stint at that specific address, serving as a powerful visual symbol of the brand's survival. This domestic momentum translated into a renewed confidence to look beyond British borders. In decades past, HMV's bloated corporate leadership had attempted to export its massive physical footprint across the globe, like the aforementioned largest music shop in North America and the Canadian operation purchased by Sunrise Records. Those historic expansions frequently collided with severe logistical hurdles and eventually collapsed under the weight of extremely high rent costs. But armed with a new, highly agile retail blueprint, Doug Putman felt confident enough to cautiously rebuild an international presence. In May 2023, Sunrise Records announced that HMV would re-enter the Irish market, opening a shop on Dublin's Henry Street. This was quickly followed by expansions into Belgium in late 2023 and the Netherlands in November 2025. Putman eventually utilized his ownership of Toys R Us Canada to announce a return to the Canadian market in February 2024, introducing HMV-branded store-within-a-store departments to carry music and pop culture collectibles without taking on massive standalone leases. The success of this physical format continues to defy digital expectations. On July 21st, 2024, the managing director of HMV, Phil Halliday, revealed that the retailer's physical visual category was growing, noting that 4K and Blu-ray have been doing particularly well. The public had slowly realized that relying entirely on digital streaming platforms meant giving up actual ownership of their media, leaving them vulnerable to content being deleted. HMV stabilized its operations by directly servicing this specific demographic. The company abandoned broad high street retail tactics in favor of decentralized curation, ensuring each location stocks what its local customers are actually looking for. But what do you reckon? Is HMV actually on the path to sustained profitability, or are they destined to repeat the mistakes of their past? Do you rely entirely on the convenience of digital streaming, or are you part of the growing physical media revival? Drop all your thoughts in the comments section below, love reading all of them. And if you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, make sure to hit that sub button and ring that bell so you don't miss out on any of our content. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and stay curious.